The sound of heavy machinery woke me at dawn. By the time I rushed outside, it was too late. The historic ranch bridge, my property's centerpiece built by my grandfather, was being torn apart. HOA officials stood watching as workers reduced decades of history to rubble. "Violation of community standards," one of them called out, not even looking at me. "You had plenty of warnings." I had received warnings, yes. Endless letters about this unauthorized structure that had existed long before their precious HOA was even formed. But I never imagined they would destroy it, never dreamed they would trespass, bring in equipment, and demolish property worth thousands without a court order. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly have realized, was that in their rush to enforce their petty rules, they had just crossed a line that would change everything. They thought I was just another resident they could push around, another homeowner to intimidate with fines and threats. They believed they had all the power. But what happens when you discover the person you've been bullying isn't who you think they are? What happens when you realize you've just provoked someone who holds more authority in their little finger than your entire HOA board combined? Judge Eleanor Vance moved to Whispering Pines Ranch Estates for one reason: silence. After 30 years on the federal bench, presiding over organized crime trials, constitutional battles, and cases that made national headlines, she craved the sound of wind through the oaks, the distant lowing of cattle, and the creak of the historic bridge spanning Willow Creek on her property. The bridge wasn't just infrastructure, it was legacy. Hand-built by her grandfather in 1948 from local stone and reclaimed timber, it connected the main house to the 50-acre back pasture where Eleanor now raised a small herd of heritage cattle. It was a monument to resilience, a physical link to her roots, and the absolute heart of her carefully chosen retirement sanctuary. The community, a gated enclave of 20 ranch-style estates on the outskirts of Austin, Texas, seemed perfect when she bought the property 5 years ago. Brochures promised Western heritage living with modern amenities. The HOA, led by the impeccably coiffed and perpetually displeased Richard Harmon, a retired insurance adjuster who wielded the community's bylaws like a weapon, presented itself as merely preserving aesthetic harmony. Eleanor, accustomed to navigating complex legal terrain, reviewed the covenants meticulously before signing. Nothing, she noted with satisfaction, prohibited existing historical structures. The bridge, predating the HOA's formation by nearly half a century, was grandfathered in. Or so she believed. Eleanor's days followed a peaceful rhythm. Up at dawn, coffee on the stone patio overlooking the creek, checking fences on horseback, tending to her cattle. She wasn't reclusive. She hosted the occasional book club meeting, donated generously to the community fund, and always waved to neighbors. But she valued her privacy fiercely. Her judicial robes were replaced by worn jeans and cowboy boots, and her courtroom demeanor softened into quiet contentment. The bridge was her daily touchstone, a tangible connection to simpler times and the man who'd taught her about integrity. She'd often pause mid-crossing, running her hand over the cool, moss-dotted stone, feeling the solid weight of history beneath her fingers. Whispering Pines attracted a specific demographic: successful professionals seeking a slice of perceived rural authenticity without the actual mess of ranching. They prized their meticulously landscaped properties, their designer barns, often housing luxury cars instead of livestock, and the illusion of exclusivity. Richard Harmon embodied this. His own property was a sterile showcase of xeriscaping and faux rustic accents. He took immediate umbrage at Eleanor's bridge, not because it violated any written rule he could find initially, but because it was real. It had age, character, and a purpose beyond decoration. It didn't fit the sanitized, controlled version of ranch life he was selling. The first subtle hint of trouble came 3 months after Eleanor moved in. A polite typed letter from the HOA management company, CC'd to Harmon, arrived in her mailbox. It requested a courtesy inspection of all structures on the property, including the creek crossing. Eleanor, familiar with bureaucratic overreach, smiled wryly. She invited the inspector, a young man named Kevin, who seemed more interested in the cattle than the bridge. He took photos, made notes, and left. Nothing more was said for months. Eleanor dismissed it as Harmon flexing his authority, a minor annoyance in her otherwise idyllic retirement. Life continued. Eleanor formed a cautious friendship with Martha Gable, a retired literature professor who lived 2 properties over. Martha, a keen observer of human nature, warned Eleanor about Harmon during one of their morning walks. "He likes control, Eleanor. And your bridge? It's uncontrolled. It's wild. It represents something he can't quantify or regulate." Eleanor nodded but remained unconcerned. She'd faced down mob bosses. What could a petty HOA president really do? She began making minor modifications to the bridge, reinforcing a support pillar, replacing a few worn planks with identical reclaimed wood. It was maintenance, preservation. She documented everything, photographing the work, keeping receipts. She felt secure in her rights, confident in the historical record. The bridge was hers, a piece of her soul made manifest on the land. She couldn't imagine anyone would dare try to take it away. But as the Texas sun beat down on the manicured lawns and pristine faux barns of Whispering Pines, Richard Harmon was quietly compiling his case. He wasn't targeting the bridge for its historical value or its structural integrity. He was targeting it because it was Eleanor's, because it represented a past, an authenticity, a stubborn independence that threatened the fragile, controlled ecosystem he'd built. He saw the bridge not as heritage, but as an eyesore. And in his world, eyesores had to be eliminated. Eleanor, immersed in the peaceful rhythm of ranch life, tending her cattle, and walking the historic bridge her grandfather built, remained blissfully unaware of the meticulous, petty campaign being waged against her sanctuary. She thought the battle was over. She had no idea it was just beginning. The first official violation notice arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped under Eleanor's front gate like a coward's accusation. The crisp, expensive paper bore the Whispering Pines HOA letterhead, Richard Harmon's signature scrawled beneath a block of legalese. The subject line screamed, "Unauthorized structure violation of Covenant 7.4, Structural Aesthetics Harmony." The fine? $5,000, payable within 30 days. The offense? Failure to obtain prior approval for the creek crossing structure, bridge, and its non-compliance with community architectural standards. Eleanor stared at the document, the familiar weight of judicial robes settling over her shoulders, despite the worn denim shirt she wore. This is how it starts, she thought, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. Not with a bang, but with bureaucratic paperwork designed to intimidate. She remembered mobsters using similar tactics, endless, costly legal maneuvers to wear down opponents. But this wasn't the mafia. This was Richard Harmon playing kingmaker in his suburban fiefdom. Her first instinct was to dismiss it. The bridge was grandfathered. She had the original property survey, the county records, even the faded photograph of her grandfather standing proudly beside the newly finished structure in 1948. But Eleanor knew better than to ignore a legal challenge, however petty. Dismissal could be construed as agreement. She needed to respond strategically. She spent the next 3 days immersed in the Whispering Pines HOA bylaws, county ordinances, and Texas property law. The document was meticulous, highlighting Covenant 7.4's vague language about structures impacting the visual harmony of the community and requiring prior written approval for any new construction or significant alteration. The HOA's argument hinged on 2 fallacies. First, that the bridge constituted new construction, absurd, GB's, even its age. And second, that her recent maintenance, replacing a few rotten planks with identical reclaimed wood, constituted a significant alteration requiring approval. Armed with irrefutable evidence, The 1948 survey, historical photographs, county tax records listing the bridge as a permanent structure for decades, and receipts showing only minor maintenance, Eleanor drafted a formal response. It was cool, precise, and devastatingly logical. She attached copies of every document, circled the relevant grandfather clause in the original HOA formation documents, which Harmon conveniently omitted from his violation notice, and politely requested the $5,000 fine be rescinded and the matter closed. She sent it via certified mail, return receipt requested. She felt a surge of confidence. Reason and evidence will prevail, she thought. Even here. The response came 2 weeks later. Not a retraction, not an apology, a summons. Mandatory appearance before the Architectural Review Committee, ARC. Date, time, location, Harmon's own sterile, faux rustic, great room. The committee? Harmon himself, his sycophantic neighbor Brenda Peterson, whose own property featured a suspiciously new, regulation-compliant footbridge over a dry creek bed, and one other member, a man Eleanor vaguely recognized as a retired dentist named Dr. Miller. No legal counsel allowed, no recording devices permitted, just Eleanor, facing the tribunal. The meeting was a masterclass in petty tyranny. Harmon presided from a leather armchair like a benevolent dictator, a mug of coffee steaming beside a stack of manila folders. Brenda offered tight, patronizing smiles. Dr. Miller looked uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact. Judge Vance, Harmon began, his voice dripping with false respect. Thank you for coming. We appreciate your perspective on this matter. However, the ARC has reviewed your submission. While the historical nature of the structure is noted, he paused, as if granting a great concession, it doesn't negate the fact that it visually dominates the creek area. It's out of scale with the intended aesthetic of whispering pines. Furthermore, he leaned forward, his eyes hardening, your recent work, regardless of how minor you claim it was performed without ARC approval. That is a clear violation of Covenant 7.4. Eleanor remained calm, her voice steady. Mr. Harmon, Covenant 7.4 applies to new construction or significant alteration. This structure predates the HOA by 47 years. It is grandfathered under Section 2.1 of the original covenants. The work performed was routine maintenance, identical in material and scope to repairs done over the past 2 decades. I have photographic evidence and contractor statements confirming this. The fine is baseless, and this committee lacks the authority to order the removal or alteration of a legally existing, non-conforming structure. Brenda sniffed. But it's just so crude, Eleanor. All that stone and rough wood. It looks like something out of a history book, not a modern upscale community. It lowers property values. People expect a certain refinement. Dr. Miller shifted in his seat. Well, legally the grandfather clause seems solid, but perhaps we could discuss modifications to make it more palatable. Harmon cut him off. The RC's decision is final. The $5,000 fine stands. Additionally, he slid another paper across the polished coffee table towards Eleanor. You are hereby ordered to submit architectural plans for a replacement bridge within 60 days. The replacement must comply with current ARC aesthetic guidelines, composite materials, clean lines, maximum width of 6 feet. Failure to comply will result in daily fines of $250, beginning immediately, and potential legal action for injunction. Eleanor didn't touch the paper. She looked from Harmon's smug face to Brenda's simpering one, to Dr. Miller's downcast eyes. The room felt suffocating, the air thick with the smell of expensive coffee and raw power. She stood slowly, her posture radiating a quiet authority that made even Harmon lean back slightly. Mr. Harmon, this committee is operating outside its legal authority. Your decision is arbitrary, capricious, and violates both the express terms of your own covenants and Texas property law. I will not be paying this fine. I will not be submitting plans for a replacement bridge. And I will not be harassed into destroying my family's legacy. Consider this my formal appeal to the full HOA board, as required by Section 9.3 of your bylaws. I expect a hearing scheduled within 30 days. Good day. She walked out, leaving silence and simmering resentment behind her. She felt a tremor of unease. She'd faced down criminals, but this felt different. It was personal, insidious, happening in her own sanctuary. The peaceful rhythm of ranch life was shattered, replaced by the drumbeat of conflict. The retaliation was swift and petty, like a swarm of mosquitoes. Within days, the routine inspections began. An HOA-hired inspector, different from the first, began showing up unannounced, sometimes twice a week, clipboard in hand. He measured fence heights, finding one post 0.5 inches too high, photographed her cattle, claiming they were too close to the property line, and documented the overgrown state of her native wildflower meadow, which she deliberately cultivated for pollinators. Each visit generated a new violation notice: $250 for the fence post, $500 for uncontrolled livestock proximity, $750 for failure to maintain grounds in accordance with community standards. The fines mounted into the thousands. The neighborhood watch, or witch hunt. Neighbors. Eleanor had barely spoken to suddenly became amateur code enforcers. A complaint about excessive mud on her driveway after rain, from her truck, not the non-existent HOA-mandated concrete apron. Another about unauthorized agricultural activity, raising a few heritage cattle on her 50 acres, explicitly permitted. Under zoning. A particularly egregious complaint accused her of intentionally creating a flood risk, because the creek flowed under her historic bridge, not around a non-existent HOA-preferred culvert. Each anonymous complaint triggered another investigation and another fine. The service disruption. Her regular feed delivery driver was informed by the HOA-managed gate security that he needed a commercial vehicle permit to enter, a permit that didn't exist and took weeks of Eleanor's calls to the management company to resolve. The well pump repairman was turned away twice for lack of prior approval for service calls. It was clear harassment, designed to make her life difficult and isolate her. Eleanor fought back methodically. She documented everything. She sent detailed point-by-point rebuttals to every violation, citing specific covenant sections and county regulations. She demanded copies of the anonymous complaints, which the HOA initially refused, forcing her to threaten a Texas Public Information Act request. She contacted the county agricultural extension agent to confirm her cattle operation was legal. She even had a surveyor remark her property lines, confirming her cattle were well within her bounds. But reason was a blunt weapon against a mob armed with bureaucracy and malice. The fines kept coming. The ARC appeal hearing was a farce. The same 3 members, the same preordained outcome. The full HOA board, packed with Harmon's allies, upheld the ARC's decision. The daily $250 fines for non-compliance with the bridge order continued to accrue. The legal fees for her property lawyer were mounting. The financial pressure was real, designed to break her. The breaking point came on a sweltering August afternoon. Eleanor was overseeing the delivery of new fencing materials, essential for containing her cattle safely. The truck pulled up to the gate. The guard, a new one Eleanor didn't recognize, checked his clipboard. "Sorry, ma'am," he said, not meeting her eyes. "I have orders not to allow any deliveries to this address without direct authorization from Mr. Harmon." Eleanor felt a cold fury wash over her. This wasn't about a bridge anymore. This wasn't about covenants. This was about control. This was Richard Harmon trying to starve her out, to make her ranch unworkable, to force her to bend the knee or leave. He was using the HOA's infrastructure, the gate, the security, as a weapon. "Call Mr. Harmon," Eleanor said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Tell him Judge Eleanor Vance needs to speak with him, now." 20 minutes later, Harmon arrived, not in his usual golf cart, but in a sleek black sedan. He got out, adjusting his tie, a picture of smug authority. "Judge Vance," he said, oozing false concern. "There seems to be a misunderstanding. We're just ensuring all deliveries are properly vetted for community safety." "Community safety?" Eleanor shot back, her voice low and intense. "You're preventing essential supplies for my livestock. That's not safety, Richard. That's harassment. That's potentially animal cruelty, and it's illegal." Harmon's smile tightened. "We have rules, Eleanor. Rules you seem determined to ignore. This bridge issue could have been resolved months ago if you'd just complied. Instead, you've chosen to be difficult. These consequences are your own doing." "My own doing?" Eleanor took a step closer, her presence suddenly formidable, the judge beneath the rancher emerging. "You've levied over $20,000 in frivolous fines. You've harassed me with baseless complaints. You've interfered with my ability to maintain my property and care for my animals. You've abused your position as HOA president to wage a personal vendetta because you don't like the look of my grandfather's bridge. This isn't about covenants, Richard. This is about you. This is about your pathetic need to control everything and everyone in this little kingdom you've built." Harmon's face flushed with anger. "You're out of line, Vance. The HOA has spoken. The fines stand. The bridge order stands. And if you continue to defy us, we will take legal action. We will seek an injunction. We will have that bridge removed. And you will pay every penny in fines and legal costs. You may have been a big shot in your courtroom, but here, I make the rules." He turned and got back into his car, leaving Eleanor standing by the gate, the fencing truck idling, the Texas sun beating down. The air crackled with unspoken threat. The delivery was eventually allowed, but the message was clear. Harmon was done playing. He was escalating to open warfare. The next morning, a thick envelope arrived, not from the HOA management company, from a high-priced law firm downtown retained by the Whispering Pines HOA. Inside was a formal cease and desist letter demanding immediate compliance with all ARC orders, payment of all accrued fines, now exceeding $25,000, and the submission of plans for the new bridge within 7 days. Failure to comply would result in the filing of a lawsuit seeking injunctive relief, a court order forcing her to remove the historic bridge. Monetary damages, recovery of all fines, plus the HOA's legal fees, estimated at $50,000 plus. Contempt of court, if she defied the injunction. Eleanor sat at her kitchen table, the letter spread before her, the weight of it pressing down. She looked out the window at the bridge, the morning light glinting off the worn stone. It wasn't just a structure, it was a symbol of her family, of history, of resilience. And Richard Harmon, with his petty rules and his army of sycophants, was trying to erase it. The peaceful retirement she craved felt like a distant dream. The battle lines were drawn. Harmon thought he had her cornered, backed by lawyers and bureaucracy. He thought he could intimidate her with financial ruin and legal threats. He believed he held all the power. He had no idea who he was really dealing with. He saw a retired rancher. He didn't see the federal judge who had dismantled criminal empires. He didn't see the woman who understood the law better than his expensive attorneys. He didn't see the person who, when pushed too far, knew exactly how to fight back and win. Eleanor picked up the phone, her expression hardening into resolve. It was time to stop playing defense. It was time to bring the full weight of her authority to bear. Harmon wanted a legal battle. He was about to get one. And he had just made the biggest mistake of his petty little life. The morning air hung thick and still, heavy with the scent of impending violence. Not the violence of fists, but of machinery and malice. Eleanor Vance stood on her porch, a cup of untouched coffee cooling in her hand, watching the procession of vehicles turn onto her private drive. 3 heavy-duty pickup trucks, a flatbed carrying a compact excavator, and a gleaming black sedan she recognized all too well. The car belonging to the high-priced law firm retained by the HOA. Richard Harmon sat in the passenger seat, a look of grim satisfaction etched on his face, like a conqueror surveying his prize. Today was the day they came for the bridge. The previous week had been a blur of frantic legal maneuvering. Eleanor's own attorney, a sharp property law specialist named Sarah Jenkins, had filed a vigorous defense against the HOA's lawsuit. They'd argued grandfather clauses, lack of jurisdiction, harassment, and selective enforcement. They'd submitted mountains of evidence, historical photos, county records, expert testimony on the bridge's structural integrity and historical significance. But Judge Miller, the same judge who'd presided over the farcical ARC appeal, had seemed unsympathetic. He'd granted the HOA's request for a preliminary injunction, effectively ordering Eleanor not to interfere with the bridge's removal pending the full trial. It was a devastating blow, a legal green light for Harmon's demolition crew. The appeal was filed, but it would take time. Time Eleanor didn't have. The vehicles pulled to a stop near the bridge. Workers in hard hats began unloading equipment, the clank of metal and the rumble of diesel engines shattering the morning peace. Harmon emerged from the sedan, straightening his tie, flanked by a young, smug associate from the law firm. He spotted Eleanor on the porch and gave a curt, almost triumphant nod. "Judge Vance," he called out, his voice carrying across the lawn. "Regrettable it had to come to this, but rules are rules. Compliance is mandatory. Please remain on your porch and observe quietly. The sheriff has been notified of our lawful activity here today." Eleanor didn't move. She didn't shout. She simply watched, her expression unreadable, a stillness at her core that belied the storm of calculated strategy raging within. She saw the fear in the eyes of some of the workers, men hired for a job, not necessarily invested in Harmon's vendetta. She saw the predatory eagerness in the eyes of the young lawyer, and she saw the naked power trip radiating from Harmon himself. He believed he'd won. He believed the law, manipulated by his influence and money, was on his side. He believed he was untouchable. The excavator operator started the engine, a deafening roar that echoed off the hills. The bucket arm swung towards the nearest stone support pillar of the bridge. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The moment her grandfather's legacy, the symbol of her sanctuary, was to be desecrated. The moment Harmon's petty tyranny reached its zenith. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. Then, she lifted a small, elegant cell phone, not her usual ranch phone, but a secure, encrypted device she kept for official communications. She pressed a single button, holding it to her ear for a moment before lowering it. Her voice, when it came, was low, clear, and carried an authority that cut through the diesel roar like a knife. "Federal Protective Service Dispatch, this is Judge Eleanor Vance, District of Texas, retired. Code Silver 7. Immediate on-site intervention required at Whispering Pines Ranch Estates, Lot 7. Active destruction of federal property in progress. Armed response authorized. Coordinates transmitted. Secure the perimeter. Detain all parties involved. I am on site." Ahudis, assuming command of the situation. A stunned silence fell over the work crew. The excavator engine suddenly seemed too loud, then was abruptly shut off. The young lawyer with Harmon paled, his smugness evaporating into confusion. Harmon himself froze mid-stride, turning slowly towards Eleanor, his face a mask of disbelief, then dawning horror. "Federal... what?" he sputtered. "Eleanor, what are you talking about? This is private property, a civil matter. You can't..." He was cut off by the sound of sirens, rapidly approaching. Not just any sirens, but the distinctive layered wail of multiple law enforcement vehicles converging fast. 2 black SUVs, with government plates, lights flashing silently, skidded to a halt at Eleanor's gate, blocking the HOA's vehicles in. 3 more marked Sheriff's Department cruisers arrived seconds later, fanning out. The doors of the SUVs opened, and figures emerged. Not regular deputies, but Federal Protective Service officers, distinct in their dark uniforms with FPS prominently displayed, armed and moving with practiced precision. They were accompanied by the county sheriff himself, a man Eleanor knew professionally, who looked grimly determined. The lead FPS officer, a woman with sharp eyes and an unyielding demeanor, approached Eleanor, snapping a crisp salute. "Judge Vance, we have secured the perimeter. All personnel are contained. What are your orders, ma'am?" "Thank you, Captain," Eleanor replied, her voice now carrying the full weight of her former office. She stepped off the porch, moving towards the bridge, the officers falling into formation around her like a protective shield. Harmon and the young lawyer stood rooted to the spot, trapped between the bridge and the advancing federal presence. "Richard Harmon," Eleanor said, her voice ringing with cold fury, no longer the rancher but the judge, "you stand accused of multiple federal felonies, conspiracy to destroy federal property, destruction of historic property, violation of the Archaeological Resources Protection Act, obstruction of justice, and using the instruments of interstate commerce, namely the U.S. Postal Service and electronic communications, to perpetrate a scheme of harassment and extortion against a sitting federal officer. You have willfully and knowingly violated numerous federal statutes, believing your position within a homeowners association granted you immunity. You were gravely mistaken." Harmon's face was ashen. He looked wildly around, seeking support from his lawyer, who was now backing away, hands slightly raised. This is absurd. Eleanor, you're retired. This bridge isn't federal property. It's mine. I mean, the HOA's. We have a court order." Eleanor stopped a few feet from him. "That court order was obtained under false pretenses, through the deliberate suppression of evidence regarding the bridge's status on the National Register of Historic Places. A status I finalized last month using the very historical documentation you tried to dismiss. That court order is null and void, obtained through fraud upon the court. And as for my status?" She took another step, her gaze locking onto Harmon's, making him flinch. "Retired from the bench, perhaps, but my appointment, my security clearance, and the protection afforded me under the Federal Judges Act and the U.S. Marshals Service? Those are for life. You didn't just harass a neighbor, Richard. You waged war on the United States federal judiciary. You threatened the safety and security of a federal officer. You crossed a line from petty tyranny into federal jurisdiction. And you did it because you couldn't stand the sight of a bridge." The captain of the FPS detail stepped forward. "Richard Harmon, you are under federal arrest. You have the right to remain silent." As she began reading Miranda rights, two officers moved towards Harmon, who seemed to collapse in on himself, all bluster gone, replaced by raw, whimpering fear. They secured his hands behind his back with federal restraints. The young lawyer wasn't spared. "Mr. Harmon's counsel," Eleanor said, her voice icy, "you are also detained as a material witness and potential co-conspirator. Your communications, your filings, your advice in this matter all constitute evidence in a federal criminal investigation. You will be interviewed separately." The lawyer's protestations died in his throat as another FPS officer escorted him firmly towards one of the SUVs. Eleanor turned her attention to the demolition crew. "Gentlemen," she said, her tone firm but not unkind, "you were hired to do a job. You were likely misled about the legality and implications of that job. Your equipment is now evidence. You will remain here until federal agents can take your statements. Cooperate fully, and this will likely be the end of your involvement in this matter. Your employer, the HOA, and specifically Mr. Harmon, bear the full legal and financial liability." The workers, looking immensely relieved, nodded mutely, putting down their tools. The sheriff approached Eleanor. "Judge, we'll need to secure this entire area as a federal crime scene. The bridge, the access points, all of it." "Absolutely, Sheriff," Eleanor agreed. "I want every piece of paper, every email, every recording related to this bridge, the fines, the harassment, and this demolition order seized from the HOA office and Harmon's home. Subpoenas for bank records, communications with the law firm, everything. I want this network exposed." "It will be done, Judge," the sheriff assured her. Eleanor Wassien bulked slowly towards the bridge, the FPS officers maintaining a respectful distance. She ran her hand over the cool, moss-dotted stone, the same stone her grandfather had laid. It was still standing, unharmed. The threat was over. The battle was won, not just for her, but for the principle that no petty despot, hiding behind HOA bylaws, is above the law. She turned to face the scene. Harmon being led away in disgrace, the lawyer following, the demolition crew standing idle, the federal agents securing the area. The sun was higher now, bathing the bridge in a warm, golden light. The silence that had fallen was profound, broken only by the occasional radio call from the officers. The captain of the FPS detail approached. "Judge Vance, the scene is secure. The primary suspect is in custody. We'll need a formal statement from you when you're ready." Eleanor nodded, her gaze sweeping across her property, her sanctuary, no longer violated, but vindicated. She looked towards the gate, where a small crowd of Whispering Pines residents had gathered, kept back by sheriff's deputies. She saw Martha Gable, her face etched with concern and relief. She saw other neighbors, some shocked, some looking guilty, some simply stunned. "Captain," Eleanor said, her voice strong and clear, carrying towards the watching residents, "ensure Mr. Harmon understands that the full weight of the United States Department of Justice is now focused on him and his co-conspirators. This isn't about fines or injunctions anymore. This is about felony charges. This is about prison time. This is about the consequences of believing a little power makes you untouchable." She paused, her eyes meeting those of her neighbors, making sure they understood the lesson being delivered. "And remind him as he sits in a federal holding cell exactly who it was he tried to bully. Remind him what federal protection truly means."